We are delighted to see such a terrific turnout tonight. This is a new kind of event for us, doing something like this over Zoom. And so for people to be able to join us from across the country is an incredible treat. I would also first like to welcome Jennifer Borman, who couple short months ago, 6 weeks ago, was named Commonwealth's next head of school. She's here from Providence, and she'll be coming up and on July 1st, moving into this office. And we're delighted to have you with us tonight, Jennifer. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I'd like to introduce and first to thank and also to introduce Carly, our Director of Alumni Affairs, Alicia, our Director of Advancement, and I believe Morgan Chalou, who is also our Development Assistant, is here. They worked together to put tonight's event together, and they juggle lots of balls and make a lot of things happen around here. And as with so many things, they're reinventing the way we do things in this age of COVID, and they're doing a terrific job. So welcome, thank you, Alicia and Carly. And now I will give the briefest of introductions. We gave fuller profiles on the event announcement, but I just want to say it is once again, another honor for me and a real pleasure to have Charles Fried back speaking once again. He's been involved with the school for decades, a trustee for about 30 years. He was on the search committee when I was hired and has been incredibly supportive of the school as a parent of 2 alums, grandparent of an alum, and grandparent of a current sophomore. Charles has been an advocate for the school for an incredibly long time, and he has also spoken at a number of assemblies. After his time as Solicitor General in the late 80s, I can remember his coming in during Judith Keenan's tenure to speak about the Webster case to our students in the 90s. And it was a terrific, thought-provoking assembly. So we're delighted that Charles is here with us tonight. And also, it's great to have my former colleague as a teacher, David Kravitz. Charles has the Renaissance view behind him. David is a true Renaissance person. He taught physics after graduating from Swarthmore for a few years at Commonwealth. He then went off to law school, clerked for Stephen Breyer and Sandra Day O'Connor, as you read, had a distinguished law career, then went on to a distinguished career in opera, and where he was, according to the New York Times, known as a charismatic baritone. I've seen him perform, and he was terrific. He has relapsed into the legal profession, I guess is the way you might put it, David, and now is working, as you know, in Maura Healey's office. So we are delighted that they agreed to come speak to us about the court. And so without further ado, I present Charles Fried and David Kravitz. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that very kind introduction. And welcome everybody. It's really a thrill, as Bill says, to see so many people at this event. I'm personally delighted that despite the current unfortunate circumstances of the pandemic, that we're able to continue to do these events. These have been a real highlight for me personally, and I think also for the Alumni Association. And so we are thrilled to be able to carry on the Merrill Series. And I'm particularly delighted to be talking with Charles Fried about this incredibly interesting and important and timely subject. We find ourselves at a remarkable moment in the history of the Supreme Court. There is, as we all know, there is a new majority on the court. We don't know a lot yet about what they're going to do because Justice Amy Coney Barrett has only recently taken her seat. But it seems likely that things will change. We also don't know who controls the Senate right now because the 2 elections that are coming up in Georgia, as I'm sure you know, will determine whether Democrats or Republicans will control the Senate, and therefore will control first of all, the possibility of legislative changes that may affect the court, and also the possibility that President Biden may be able to get his judicial nominees through the Senate. So with all of that up in the air, let's just dive right in. So the impetus of this conversation, I think it's fair to say, was a piece, Charles, that you published in the New York Times a few weeks back, talking about the current state of the court and what a President Biden might do and why he might do it. And I wanted to start by asking what you meant, to unpack a little bit. You described the current majority on the Supreme Court not as conservative, which is the way they are often described, but as reactionary. And I would love to know a little bit more about what you meant by that.
Well, yes, I have been beating that drum for some time, because the journalistic tick has been to refer to Republicans as conservative, and that then encompasses the Scalias, the Thomases, the justice you clerked for, Sandra Day O'Connor, Bill Rehnquist, the previous Chief Justice, a range of persons. And what I meant when I said that I resent the notion of them all being called conservative, and then by the same token, of course, everyone on the other side is called a liberal, is that the word conservative in political parlance has always meant a certain sort of political stance. One thinks particularly of Edmund Burke, Mr. Conservative. Well, Edmund Burke was the great proponent of the rights of the American colonists against the reactionary politics of George III. What I think of as reactionary is that when you look at Clarence Thomas, who is a very nice man, he was in fact my client when I was Solicitor General. The largest number of cases that I had really came from the Equal Opportunity Commission, of which he was chairman. And he was a very reasonable person to deal with. As I remember that the first time the question came up, is sexual harassment a violation of Title VII, sexual discrimination? And there were people in my office, civil servants, going back decades, who thought, well, no, that's not what anybody had in mind when they passed Title VII. And the Judge Starr on the DC Circuit, Judge Bork on the DC Circuit, really agreed with that view. So it was in the Supreme Court, and the question was, what would be the position taken by the government, by the Solicitor General? And the custom is that when an agency has a matter of interest to it, which they want to argue to the Solicitor General about how the Solicitor General should present that to the court, that agency sends its general counsel. Well, Clarence was the chairman, and he sent himself. He came and he persuaded us that we should take the position that sexual harassment was a violation of Title VII. And I remember vividly how he argued that you should see the cases that we see in the commission, how harassment of women is a terrific impediment to their employment opportunities and to their willingness to work. Well, it was a very powerful argument. We made it and we prevailed. So that's my recollection of Clarence, who has changed enormously. And I don't know why. He's the same very lovely person. Your old boss, Stephen Breyer, is extremely fond of him, as are all his colleagues. Well, I think it may have something to do with the terrible way in which he was treated in his confirmation hearings. He never quite got over it. And it's in that context that he took up the stance that one should pay no attention to precedent and only attend to what the original intent of constitutional provisions was. What is it that they had in mind when they passed those things? A position, by the way, which was at odds with his position on Title VII and sexual harassment. Well, that would have caused the court to go back over 200 years to decide what the meaning of free speech was. It would certainly never cover libel. It would certainly not cover advertising or commercial speech and so on. Well, that is literally a reactionary position. It's very much the position that Anthony Scalia, a brilliant man and a wonderful writer, took. And when his actual mirror image, opposite number, Bill Brennan, would talk about a living constitution, Nino made a point of saying, my constitution is not living, it's dead, dead, dead. That's a reactionary position. It really defines it. But I think the court is reactionary in a more insidious way, because both Clarence and Nino, I mean, these men were my friends. I played poker with Scalia. Good company he was. These men's stance were principled. I am thinking now of Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. They have a project. What is their project? Their project is to dismantle the present familiar administrative state, which is run, which has expert administrative agencies, which are supposed to pay attention to technical knowledge, expertise, and so on, to dismantle it and put it entirely at the control of the president. And you could see that in a number of cases that they take. David, you're familiar with them, that they want to insist on the independence, on dismantling the independence of the independent agencies, like the Federal Reserve Board, like the FTC, like the SEC. All of these and a number of other expert agencies are supposed to be really, in their view, part of the executive establishment and subject to the control of the president. That would take us past the reforms of the late 19th century, past the reforms of Theodore Roosevelt, past the reforms of Woodrow Wilson, and certainly past what FDR accomplished in the New Deal, because of course the FCC and a number of those agencies were his creatures, and well, the Federal Reserve Board goes back much further than that. That project is a reactionary project. The conservative is a person who wants to go slowly, to respect the past, but to make changes carefully as wisdom, prudence indicates is appropriate. That is exactly the other person who you clerked for, David. That's Sandra Day O'Connor. Both Thomas and Scalia were dead set against any kind of affirmative action. Sandra O'Connor, not so. Careful, don't go overboard, no quotas, but that was that is a conservative position. Anthony Kennedy, similarly. Well, Sandra O'Connor is gone. Anthony Kennedy is gone. And we have now Brett Kavanaugh, who signs on to this reactionary project. He's a very smart man and a very good lawyer. Brett Kavanaugh, that's Brett Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, you saw in his concurring opinion in the Brooklyn and the two church cases was strongly hostile to expertise and very, very respectful of churches in a way that struck me as reactionary. The Chief Justice, Roberts, he concurred. He dissented. He concurred in the decisions back in the days when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was on the court. He said, look, let's go slow. Let's listen in the case of a pandemic. Let's listen to the science, to the experts. That's a conservative position. And one other person who is a strong reactionary is Samuel Alito, who in a speech to the Federalist Society objected to a 1905 decision out of Massachusetts in the Supreme Court, which celebrated the public health virtues of mandatory inoculation, smallpox inoculation. And Alito allowed himself the phrase, because the case came out of the city of Cambridge, what happens in Cambridge should stay in Cambridge. Well, that is 1, 2, 3, 4 reactionaries on the Supreme Court. That's why I said it.
Right. And there's sort of a lot going on there, but let me just take a couple of takeaways. It seems to me a lot of what you said, I think, goes to this idea of modesty, to sort of the idea of judicial modesty, not being overly confident of expertise in other areas. For example, the medical area, when we've been talking about cases that have come out of the pandemic, and not wanting to adopt too radical of a change. So, for example, you mentioned the business of dismantling the administrative state. One could imagine a reactionary decision would just be to say, well, the entire structure of the whole thing is unconstitutional. It has to go, and that would just, basically incapacitate the federal government. A more modest or perhaps conservative approach might be to sort of, even if you think that perhaps that the administrative state has gone too far, one could imagine a more conservative approach would be to sort of nibble around the edges a little bit, but not to sort of take the entire thing down in one fell swoop. But another question I have about that is, I think the challenge is often to sort of distinguish between the two types of decisions, where, like, for example, you and I might both think that a particular case was wrongly decided, should have come out the other way, but maybe wouldn't fall into the category of a reactionary decision or part of a series of reactionary decisions, where if you have enough of them, you actually start to create a sort of a crisis of legitimacy. And I think that's what people like you and many others are really worried about, is that the court, by going so far in some of these directions, is not only going to harm society and harm the others around it, but will really start to erode Americans' faith in the Supreme Court as a sort of a functioning institution. And nobody knows where that leads, but probably doesn't lead anywhere good.
Well, the important thing there is the notion of gradualism, and that is a hallmark of how the Supreme Court has operated. It does not wholesale get rid of large numbers of precedents. It believes in precedents. Sometimes precedents get out of date. Sometimes it turns out that precedents are really quite wrong, and therefore you have you take out one particular aspect of it. The interesting example, of course, was gay marriage. A very extreme position might have been, well, why is government in the marriage business at all? Isn't every marriage rule, in fact, religiously based? Let's get rid of all of it. You can marry, and then you get your religion to marry who you want. We will just set up domestic partnership, and that's the only thing that the state is interested in. That's a position really rather like obtains in France. And of course, it would have been easy at that point to say, and of course, if we are creating civil unions, we will unite you with whoever you want. You want to marry your car, all right. I mean, that would be a radical change. That's not what the court did. The court talked, and Anthony Kennedy talked about the importance of marriage as a social institution, and said, but it does not accord with contemporary notions to exclude a whole segment of society from the respect and the honor that government bestows on a couple in marriage. It's simply important to expand it. That was not a radical decision. That was a conservative decision, or if you like, progressive, but gently and with respect to precedent, not destroying an institution, expanding it. That's where we have been so far. But I'm afraid that some of the people we have there have a wrecking ball, and they are out to wreck all kinds of existing structures. And of course, there is a very large cheering squad for that. So they can go and give speeches, and thousands of people show up and cheer them.
Yeah. So let's sort of go with that for a second. Let's assume that 6 or 8 months go by, and we have a series of important decisions that have come down from the Supreme Court, and it turns out that what I would say are your worst fears have come to pass. That there really is a majority on this court, on the current court, that really is swinging a wrecking ball at a lot of important institutions, and it's not clear how to stop it. And of course, the problem that we have when the Supreme Court does that, if they base it on the Constitution, is that in our current system anyway, the court has the last word on what the Constitution means. And the only way to fix it is to amend the Constitution, which, as everybody knows, is extremely difficult to do. So, but there have been lots of proposals. There's been a lot of talk, particularly during the presidential campaign. There was a lot of talk about, well, what do we do about the Supreme Court? And I want to sort of sketch out, I'd say there are about 3 buckets of proposals that I've seen floated for doing this. The one that got the most attention, I would say, has to do with the membership of the court, which sometimes gets called court packing. Congress, of course, has the authority to change the number of justices on the court. And so you can add justices. And of course, those vacancies would be filled by the current president. There are other ways of changing the membership. There was a proposal that had to do with, having 15 justices, and the Republicans and 5 Democrats would pick 5 more, and that sort of thing. But this all has to do with expanding the membership of the court. There's another thing you could do that some have suggested, which is to actually decrease the Supreme Court's power. Congress, in addition to having control of the membership of the court, has control over the cases that the court can actually hear. It controls the jurisdiction of the court, and certain kinds of cases could simply be removed from the court's jurisdiction and either taken out altogether, or perhaps shunted into a different institution, that a constitutional court that would decide certain kinds of cases. And then a third bucket of changes are more sort of technical changes about control over the court's docket, what cases it chooses to hear, or perhaps you would say that you can't just declare a law unconstitutional 5-4. It has to be 6-3 or 7-2 or something like that. Create a supermajority requirement. So let's say that's where we are, and the Biden team comes to you and they say, what should we do? We have a Democratic majority in the Congress. we're ready to act. We're very concerned. What is your advice as to how they proceed at that point?
Well, my advice, that's what I wrote in that column, which I have it on good authority, reached the eyes of the president-elect, is to hold off. Let's see if the current court, in fact, overplays its hand. That's what Roosevelt did. Roosevelt came in 33, and his project was stymied at every turn by the Supreme Court. He did not make his court packing proposal until after he won a landslide in both houses and in the presidency in 1936. Then he felt that he was in a position to do that. Biden is not in a position to do that. He may be, or his successor may be in 2024, but he's not in a position to do that now. He is in a position to threaten to do it, and that might be something of a break on the behavior of this court. Maybe several of the justices will take their cue from the Chief Justice, who is genuinely trying to preserve the notion that the court is not a Republican court or a Democrat court, but simply a court, which has a lot of people with, they're not empty minds, but they're open minds. That's the idea. Okay, let's see if that works. And if in the course of the coming year or years, the Supreme Court is in fact an outrageous roadblock, that would authorize something like what Roosevelt proposed. Remember, Roosevelt proposed it, and it turned out not to be necessary. The court remarkably simply changed direction, and in no time at all, it was endorsing everything the New Deal came up with. So that would be both the necessary, because I don't think Biden could succeed if he went in immediately now, given the Congress that he had, but also a prudent step. There is another step which has been taken and which has bipartisan backing. That is to say, Republicans and Democrats have both proposed this, and that is a constitutional amendment which would keep the current size of the Supreme Court, but say that justices would each serve a non-renewable 18-year term. And they would be staggered as they are in the Federal Reserve and so on, so that every president would get 2 Supreme Court appointments during each presidential term. I think that's a very sound idea. 18 years is a long time. It's long enough to develop an expertise and a voice on the Supreme Court, but not so long as to develop hardening of arteries. And also, it would have the advantage that the president would no longer feel the need to pick younger and younger justices, which is a very bad thing. it is a bad thing that our justices are picked so early in their career, because they get to think of themselves as permanently in that position. And that's not a good thing. 18 years is long enough so that if you are picked at the age of 60 or in your late 50s, you're not worried about what are you going to do next after 18 years have gone by. That's your capstone to your career. That's a very good idea. And it has, as I said, attractions to all parties, and it should.
I think that's exactly right. I think term limits seems to be the one proposal for Supreme Court reform that pretty much everybody agrees on, including I saw an interview with Justice Breyer in which he said he thought it would be a great idea because he doesn't want to have to worry about when in a particular political cycle he should retire, should he wish to retire. And so I do agree. There seems to be universal support for that. I'm curious, though, the analogy to the FDR situation is fascinating to me. I wonder whether, given what we know now, which is somewhat limited, but what we know now about the folks who are currently on the Supreme Court, do we think that, how likely do we really think it is that, let's say, a Samuel Alito is going to be so sort of cowed by the possibility of structural reforms to the Supreme Court that he will suddenly abandon the project that he seems to be on? So do we really think that sort of so-called switch in time is likely? But secondly, if that does not happen, and so if over the course of a few years and maybe another congressional election, it really does look like this court is sort of hell-bent on the kind of reactionary project you've described, what would be the right kind of reform? Do we think that expanding the court is a good idea? Should we consider jurisdiction stripping or other kinds of structural changes to the way the court operates? I just wonder if you have any thoughts on the possible remedy for
one remedy you suggested, David, is creating another court for constitutional cases. Now, of course, Italy has a constitutional court. Mm-hmm. France has the Conseil Constitutionnel. Germany, which has really a wonderful legal system. They have a great legal tradition, actually. But Germany has an ordinary legal court system of very high quality and a constitutional court for constitutional cases. And that is term limited and works quite well. It's a very respected institution. I don't think that would be constitutional. The Constitution, you would need a constitutional amendment. The mm-hmm. Constitution says one Supreme Court. Well, the court you've described is the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that would work. I have some hope that Justice Kavanaugh is showing some signs of prudence. He shows some signs of prudence. Gorsuch is rather fond of the sound of his own voice. He likes to come out with ringing phrases. So, for instance, he came out with in this church thing, he came out that, all right, in an extreme case, the court can take a vacation, but it can't go on sabbatical. Well, that's clever, but he seems to like that. And if you like that kind of thing, it traps you into making more general positions than you really should take and locking you into them. Because now you're the author of this famous thing and you can't get away from it.
I know we want to leave lots of time for questions and answers. So let me just ask one more quick question, and then we'll jump to Q&A. We've talked pretty much exclusively about the Supreme Court, but of course, the Supreme Court decides 70, 60, 70, 80 cases a year. The thousands and thousands of other cases that are decided every year are decided by the lower federal courts, the district courts and the courts of appeals. And in addition to putting, President Trump has put 3 new people on the Supreme Court in a single 4-year term. That is extraordinary. No one has done that since Nixon. But he has also put a similarly high percentage of new people into the lower.
Over 200.
Yeah, hundreds of new judges.
They have shown themselves, not all of them. The judge on the Third Circuit, Stefanos Barrio, Stefanos Biba, is a Trump judge.
Yeah.
And he really let Trump have it. But on the Fifth Circuit, the 11th Circuit, the 8th Circuit, those Trump judges are Trump judges. Now, what you can do, and is not court packing, is you could have hundreds more Court of Appeals judges. And then Biden could make those appointments. That would not be court packing because, courts of appeals are used to sitting in panels. They sit in panels of 3. So that would be all right. And actually, I've written an op-ed, which I can't get published because of the time it was, where I suggest that is what Biden do, that the number of Court of Appeals judges be largely expanded, and that he fill those slots not with what the newspapers are pleased to call progressives, but ordinary lawyers who are ordinary law people who believe in precedent and who have earned the respect of their fellow lawyers, people who have argued against them, people who have lost cases to them, and so on. That would be a wonderful change. And he could do that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, Carly, do we have some questions that we can talk about?
Yes, we have a few already. So we may not have time for any more, but if you want to submit,
I can stay past 7.
Okay. If you want to submit more, feel free to send them to me in the chat. But we'll get started. We have a couple to start with.
Great.
So Peter Galbraith, class of 69, asks the following. Why not ignore the decisions of a reactionary court? No one can seriously believe that the 5 GOP justices who stopped the 2000 Florida recount would have done so had Gore been ahead of Bush. Given identical facts in law, a real court should reach the same outcome regardless of the political party of the plaintiff and defendant. Why should presidents and governors accept decisions of an unelected partisan body, especially when they try to invalidate laws enacted by the elected parts of the government?
Well, that's a revolution you're proposing. One of the things that is most heartening is that our governors, our secretaries of state, I'm thinking of Georgia, believe in following the law, not in following Trump. Well, we have a rule of law and not of men. That's an expression that was used by John Adams when he wrote the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1780. Well, I'm afraid that if you have politicians taking it upon themselves to disregard decisions of the court, you're in bad trouble. That was Orville Forbes in Little Rock. What you described, Peter, is exactly the state of mind of Orville Forbes when he wouldn't let those children into the Little Rock schools. Save us from that.
Great, thank you. Roy DeBerry, class of 66, asks, what is the entity that gives the Federalist Society such tremendous power?
Well, you know, I have since 1980 been the faculty advisor to the Harvard Law School Federalist Society. So I'm touchy on this subject. But what gives it such tremendous power? Well, it is not at all true to its origins. Its origins was to have a wide open, thoughtful arena for debate during which students can express their opinions, be they conservative, liberal, reactionary, radical, freely. That's what we believed in. Well, pretty soon it was taken over by practicing lawyers who turned it into a cult. And you go to a Federalist Society meeting and you get endless discussions about what would Nino Scalia have said on some subject. Well, it's a cult of personality. And they just signed on to Trumpism. It's terrible, terrible. Their jobs at stake.
It seems to have been uniquely successful at this.
They have indeed.
Thanks. Joe Steinfield, a father of two Commonwealth grads, Frank and Ken, asks, is a self-pardon constitutional?
Well, that is a much debated question. I think that the concept of the pardon power, which derives from the power of the sovereign, the king, to show mercy as he or she wishes, has always been thought to be something that is absolutely at the discretion of the president. And it has sometimes been exercised in a corrupt way. I think Bill Clinton's pardon of Mark Rich was corrupt, but it stuck. A self-pardon is trebly corrupt, but I think there is no mechanism around and no series of doctrines, no series of arguments by which that would be overturned. The best argument I've heard is the principle that no person should be a judge in his own cause. But of course, that's not in the Constitution. It may be part of the concept of due process, but I think it's a stretch. So I think that the president can pardon himself, yes. because I don't know what prevents it.
The one sort of interesting argument I've heard that builds off of something that you just said is that if the pardon power really does reach back to essentially the authority of the king to bestow grace on someone,
Yes.
there would be no need for the king to do that to himself, because of course the king can do no wrong. I'm not sure exactly which way that cuts, I suppose, but it might be. But one could argue, I imagine, that that the pardon power could not have been imagined to extend to a self-pardon, simply because it would have been completely inconceivable that the king would have any need or want of such a power.
Whereas the corrupt use of the pardon power has been conceived of, and we've seen it. I mean, some governors have, there was a governor of Kentucky who I believe was prosecuted for bribery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When the pardon stuck, but so did the bribery charge.
Great, thank you. Gaina Blaze, class of 16, asks, how do you think Roberts will use his power to assign the authors of the decisions to counteract the reactionary court? Can you see him side? Oh, sorry.
I've seen that so often. I've been a judge, so I've seen chief on the SJC. The chief also has the power of assignment. The power of assignment is used very strategically by chiefs. Berger used it, and Rehnquist used it more sparingly than Berger, and Roberts uses it. However, you can't use the assignment power to create a majority where you don't have one. If the chief is in the dissent, he can't assign that opinion. And that's there it is. Now, what Berger did is he often did not go into dissent, stayed with a majority so as to have the power to assign the opinion to himself, which he often did. To do that, you still have to be in the majority.
Thanks. And Judith Sanford Harris, class of 70, is curious why your article couldn't be published that you mentioned earlier.
Nobody would publish it. I sent it to the Atlantic. I sent it to the Wall Street Journal. I sent it to the Washington Post. It was at a time, I think, when they were replete with when they had lots of other things to do. I will have a way to get it to the president's eyes.
It's heartening, though, that an op-ed written by Charles Fried somehow can't get published. It makes the rest of us feel better, who have a much harder time placing.
Oh, listen, I had another op-ed which I couldn't get published, which was on lying and why the president is like Satan, the father of lies, it says in the Bible, seducing everybody from Eve onward. It was a terrific essay, and I think Polly Chatfield would have loved it, but it didn't get published.
Okay, I think we probably have time for one more question. Richard Robinson, who's former Commonwealth faculty, asks, there's some discussion of Congress preempting the court's ability to rule on some questions based on a provision in the Constitution. What are the limits and possibilities of this approach?
Well, that's the notion of jurisdictional gerrymandering. And that's been tried. It sort of doesn't work because it would be unconstitutional to prevent any court from ever hearing a particular class of case. That would not be allowed. There always has to be a court, and probably a federal court, that can hear a federal issue. Maybe not necessarily a federal court, but you can't strip it from every court. So the issue would get heard and would get ruled on, and the artificiality of that solution would really argue against its success, I think. I mean, it's a clever notion, and it's actually been tried and used in very limited circumstances.
It's a very interesting little peculiar clause in the Constitution that says Congress has, it explains what the jurisdiction of the courts is, and then it says, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. So it reads like a very broad grant of authority to Congress, but I definitely agree. It's an interesting concept. It has never been tried in a big way. You know, every year there are a couple of bills filed that says, you know, the Supreme Court shall not have the authority to rule on cases involving abortion, that kind of thing. Those bills never pass because nobody can sort of figure out what the alternative needs to be. And so it is very much uncharted territory. It's really not clear what the limitations are, as I understand it. But it's definitely something that folks who are looking for ways to potentially reform the court or change the court, that's certainly one of the constitutional hooks that people look to.
Great, thank you. I think we'll go with one more. We have time for one more, if you want to bear with us. Ashish Garg, who is a parent of a current student, would love to hear you comment on the fact that the current Supreme Court has six of the nine justices are Roman Catholic, who are 20% of the population, but 66% of the court's population, and what your thoughts are on that.
Well, my thoughts on that are that it's perhaps regrettable, but think back to John Marshall Supreme Court. I suppose 9 of the justices were Protestant Christians, and that was probably true at many times. It was a remarkable thing when we had the first Jew on the Supreme Court. These things come and go. 6 are, who do we have? We have Justice Sotomayor, but Kavanaugh, Roberts, Thomas, and who else?
Alito and Barrett.
Alito and Barrett.
And Alito, and Barrett. Oh, on the other hand, until Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, we had 3 Jews, and Jews are an even smaller percentage of the population. I wouldn't, and we have a Catholic president elect. So I wouldn't make too much out of that. It's the worst of our problems. It's the least of our problems.
Well, thank you so much, David and Charles. Do you have any closing words you want to share before we end?
Oh, don't lose hope.
Get your friends and family in Georgia to the polls. That's my closing words.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who came tonight. This is an incredible turnout, and we really appreciate you Zooming in. I know there's a lot of events you can attend, and we are really grateful that you joined us tonight for this.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And this has been recorded, so we will be able to share that as well.
For those who have been curious about my background, I'm not in Venice. I'm in Cambridge, Mass. But I vary my background, and that is the Grand Canal. And on the left is the Salute, which was built in response to the pandemic of 1640.
Everything old is new again.
Yes.
Thank you all. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.